Frazier's challenge. The gym smelled of sweat and worn leather. The air was heavy, thick with the tension of men who knew something big was about to happen. Joe Frazier, the heavyweight champion, with his broad shoulders and fists that had toppled legends, stared at Bruce Lee with a defiant smile. It was not a smile of respect, but of provocation. "Hey, Bruce, I heard you're fast. But speed doesn't win a fight. Show me your power." Bruce's eyes didn't blink. He knew Frazier wasn't there to learn, but to test. To see if that small man, just 1.70 m tall, was really all he said he was. All around them, fighters stopped their training. Some laughed, others crossed their arms, waiting for the spectacle. Bruce took a deep breath. There was no anger in his gaze, only a cold calm, like the blade of a sword before the blow. He positioned himself, his feet light, his knees slightly bent. Frazier, confident, raised his fists, ready to absorb whatever came. "Come on then," said Bruce, almost in a whisper. Frazier came forward with a straight right, a punch that could knock down a wall. But Bruce was no longer there. His body spun like a leaf in the wind, dodging the brute force with an elegance that made the spectators hold their breath. Before Frazier could react, Bruce counterattacked. The blow was so quick that no one saw it properly. A single punch, precise as lightning, struck Frazier's solar plexus. There was no bang, no dramatic impact, just a muffled sound, as if someone had hit a pillow. And then, Joe Frazier fell. It wasn't a spectacular fall. There was no stumbling, no arms flailing in the air. He just collapsed. His knees buckled, his heavy body hit the floor, and for an instant, the entire gym was silent. Frazier didn't scream, he didn't moan. He just stood there, motionless, eyes wide, mouth open for air that wasn't coming. Bruce lowered his fist, his breathing unchanged. There was no triumph on his face, just the same serenity as before. He approached Frazier, who was now trying to support himself on his elbows, his face pale. You knocked me out," Frazier managed to say, his voice hoarse, as if he had swallowed glass. Bruce reached out his hand and helped him up. "The power isn't in the size of the punch, Joe. It's in the precision. The timing." Frazier shook his head, still stunned. He had been world champion, he had taken down Muhammad Ali, but that day, in a random gym, a man smaller than him had left him breathless with a single blow. Not through brute force, but through something more dangerous, control. And in that moment, Joe Frazier understood why Bruce Lee was a legend. Not because of the stories, not because of the films, but because of what had just happened there. A punch that didn't make a sound, but that echoed louder than any knockout he had ever dealt. The weight of truth. Frazier rubbed his chin, feeling his pulse throb beneath his skin. The gym, once filled with murmurs and muffled laughter, was now silent. Even the younger sparring partners had stopped to watch, as if they knew something bigger than a simple exchange of blows had just happened. Bruce remained motionless, his hands loose at his sides, his gaze serene, as if that punch hadn't demanded anything from him. "Precision," Frazier repeated, the word coming out as a sigh. "You didn't even move properly. It just rang." Bruce tilted his head, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "The body is a machine. If you know where to push the buttons, it does the work for you." Frazier let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I hit you before. 3 times. And you always came back." "And you always taught me something," Bruce replied, crossing his arms. "Today, I taught you that brute strength is only half the fight. The other half? Is knowing when not to fight." The champion looked down, his large hands balling into loose fists. There, in the ring, he had been the king. But there, at that moment, he felt like a student before a master. And that bothered him more than any defeat. "You could have destroyed me," Frazier muttered. "Why didn't you?" Bruce took a step forward, his voice low, almost intimate. "Because you weren't the enemy. You were the mirror. And I had seen enough of my own reflection. Frazier looked up, his dark eyes burning with something beyond anger, something like recognition. He knew what Bruce was talking about. He knew about the nights when hatred for Ollie consumed him, the times when fame suffocated him, the fights that were no longer for the belt, but for the soul. And now, here, a man who barely reached his weight showed him that the real battle was not against others. It was against himself. Without another word, Frazier picked up his gloves from the floor and threw them over his shoulder. He walked to the corner of the ring, where his towel was hanging, and wrapped it tightly around his neck. For a second, Bruce thought he was going to walk away without looking back. But then, Frazier stopped. "Lee." Bruce raised an eyebrow. "If you ever need a real sparring partner, not one that lets you win. One that will make you sweat blood. Look for me." Bruce smiled, this time broadly. "I know where to find you, Smokin' Joe." Frazier nodded, as if a promise had been sealed. And then, with heavy steps, he left the gym. The legacy. Years later, when Bruce Lee was no longer among the living, Joe Frazier found himself in a documentary, talking about the great fighters he had known. The camera showed him in an empty ring, his aged hands resting on the ropes. "A lot of people think I lost to Ollie. And I did. But there was a fight that I never forgot, and it wasn't against him." He paused, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the lens. "It was against a guy who didn't even weigh 150 pounds. A guy who knocked me down without hitting me. And when I fell, he reached out his hand to me. Not to humiliate me. To show me that I could still get up." Frazier smiled, a sad, almost nostalgic smile. "That was the knockout that hurt the most. And the one that was most worth it." The camera panned away, leaving him alone in the ring, as if time itself had stopped to listen. And somewhere, Bruce Lee smiled too. The last round. The empty ring echoed with the weight of Frazier's words, as if each syllable had been ripped from a memory he was trying, in vain, to leave behind. The camera moved away, but the image of his trembling hands on the ropes remained etched in the minds of those watching. It wasn't just an interview. It was a confession. On the other side of the world, in Hong Kong, a yellowed envelope rested on the dark wooden desk in Bruce Lee's office. Inside, a single photograph, Frazier on the floor, his eyes wide not in pain but in surprise, as a hand, small but firm, reached toward him. Next to it, a note in cursive, "To the man who taught me that true strength is not in the punch, but in the courage to stand up. Joe." Bruce ran his fingers over the image, feeling the rough paper. He remembered that day as if it were yesterday. It hadn't been an official fight, not even an agreed sparring match. Just two men, a borrowed ring in Manila, and a bet that no one understood. "You can't beat a giant with technique alone," Frazier had said, laughing, as he wrapped the bands around his hands. "The ring is no place for philosophy, Lee." "Not even arrogant," Bruce had replied, adjusting his light gloves. "And you're about to find out." The first round had been a dance. Frazier, confident, advanced with heavy punches, testing his smaller opponent. Bruce dodged and counterattacked with precise kicks to the ribs and thighs, undermining the champion's resistance. In the second round, Frazier was already breathing hard, his arms were heavy. In the third, a roundhouse kick hit his jaw, not hard enough to knock him out, but enough to knock him off balance. He fell to his knees, the world spinning. And then, he saw the outstretched hand. Frazier could have refused. He could have stood up on his own, as he always had, as the world expected him to do. But something in those dark eyes, in the stillness of that gesture, paralyzed him. He accepted the help. "Why did you do that?" he growled later, as a doctor examined his swollen jaw. "Because you were going to get up anyway," said Bruce, throwing a towel over his shoulders. "But now you know you don't have to do it alone." Frazier had never forgotten. And, years later, when Bruce's fame had spread throughout the world, when films and legends turned him into an icon, the heavyweight champion kept that lesson as a secret. It wasn't about winning. It was about recognizing, at the moment of your fall, that someone still believed in you. The reunion. Philadelphia airport was crowded when Frazier disembarked, leaning on a cane. The cancer was eating him up inside, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity as when he stepped into the ring. There was one last thing to do. A car was waiting for him. Inside, a man in a dark suit, impassive face. "He doesn't want to see you," said the driver, bluntly. "I didn't ask if you wanted it," replied Frazier, settling down on the bench. The private clinic was on the outskirts of the city, a discreet place, with well-kept gardens and white walls. Bruce sat in a wheelchair, his body frail, defined muscles now hidden beneath pale skin. When Frazier entered, Bruce's eyes lit up, not in surprise, but in recognition. "It took a while," said Bruce, his voice hoarse. "I had to lose a few fights first," replied Frazier, pulling up a chair. "To understand what you meant that day." Bruce laughed, a faint but genuine sound. "And now you understand?" Frazier hesitated. He looked at his own hands, marked by decades of battles. "I understand that we spend our lives trying to prove that we are strong. But the truth is that real strength lies in letting others help you when you fall." Bruce held out his hand. Frazier held her steady. "You were always more than a fighter, Joe. You were a teacher." Frazier smiled, his eyes moist. "And you've always been a pain in the ass, Lee." They laughed together, two old warriors who had learned, too late, that the best fights were not won with punches. The legacy. Bruce Lee died 3 weeks later in his sleep. Frazier lived a few more months, long enough to record one last interview, in which he spoke not about Ollie, nor about titles, but about a man who had taken him down without using force. "We spend our lives looking for worthy opponents. But sometimes, the guy who makes you grow isn't even the one who challenges you. He's the one who gives you a helping hand when you're down." The camera panned away, showing the empty ring once again. Somewhere, the ropes were swaying slightly, as if someone had just left. And the fight, after all, ended in a draw. The last round. The years passed like blows of wind over an abandoned ring. The arenas that once echoed the roar of crowds now held only the silence of memories. But Lee and Frazier's story hasn't gone away. She transformed. In Hong Kong, a martial arts academy, previously only attended by young people looking for discipline, began to receive unexpected visitors, former fighters, trainers, even the occasional boxing promoter. Everyone wanted to see the place where Bruce Lee had trained, where, according to rumors, his presence was still felt. The owner of the place, an old kung fu master named Wong, didn't charge admission. He only asked for one thing in return, that whoever entered left a story. "If you're going to tell it, let it be true," he said, while pouring jasmine tea into chipped cups. It was there that, on a humid summer afternoon, a man with broad shoulders and scars on his knuckles entered without knocking. He wore a worn suit, but his eyes still shone with the same intensity as someone who had faced death and laughed in its face. It was George Foreman. "I heard this was the place," he said, looking around as if looking for ghosts. Wong wasn't surprised. "I had seen many like him. Do you want a story or do you want to leave one?" Foreman hesitated. Then he took a yellowed envelope out of his pocket. Inside, a handwritten letter, in Frazier's shaky handwriting. "Joe asked me to deliver this here. He said it was for Lee, but, well, there wasn't time." Wong opened the letter carefully. The words were simple, almost brutal, like a well-placed punch. "Bruce. If you're reading this, it's because I went first. I don't regret anything, just one thing, not having asked you to train with me that time in Manila. We could have broken each other in a beautiful way, you know? But you taught me something that no coach could, that strength is not just in the arms. It's in the way you hold a guy's hand when he falls. It took me years to understand this. And now that I understand, I'm leaving. If there's a ring up there, save a corner for me. We finish what we started. But this time, take your time. Thanks for everything, you crazy Chinese man. Joe. Wong folded the letter and placed it on the table. Foreman cleared his throat. He told me that if I came here, maybe I would understand what he meant by the fight that doesn't end at the bell. The master smiled, pouring more tea. And you understand? Foreman looked at his hands, thick as leather gloves. I think so. The real fight isn't against each other. It's against the idea that we need to win alone. Outside, the wind shook the trees, and for an instant, the sound of leaves mixed with the distant echo of a gong. The legacy that does not die. Years later, in Las Vegas, a young boxer named Malik the Hurricane Johnson stepped into the ring for his first world title fight. It was fast, technical, but something was missing. In training, his coach, a former middleweight champion named Eddie Ruiz, always repeated the same thing. You fight like you're afraid of losing. But losing isn't the end. It's just a way of learning to get back up. On fight night, Malik was nervous. In the locker room, while wrapping the bandages around his hands, he found a note stuck to the mirror. There was no signature, but the words were familiar. We spend our lives looking for worthy opponents. But sometimes, the guy who makes you grow isn't even the one who challenges you. He's the one who gives you a helping hand when you're down. He smiled. I knew who it was. In the ring, Malik wasn't perfect. He took blows, staggered, almost fell. But instead of backing down, he did something no one expected. He stopped fighting his fear and started fighting it. In the 12th round, he knocked out his opponent with a right cross that echoed like thunder. At the press conference, a reporter asked, "What changed today? You fought differently." Malik looked at the crowd, at the lights, at the empty ring where, somewhere, two shadows still danced. I stopped trying to win. And then, finally, I did. Outside, Eddie Ruiz lit a cigarette and smiled at the sky. Now yes, Joe. Now yes, Bruce. And somewhere, the ropes swayed again. As if someone had just left.